Folks, let me introduce Jimmy Ogle. Recently retired from the as the Peabody Duckmaster. Still serving as Shelby County historian. And he's going to tell you that he's a lifelong Memphian and a University of Memphis grad.
Memphis State University grad.
Sorry.
That's how old I am.
Is that written on parchment?
Yeah, that's the only one I got. I didn't get a new one when they redid it.
Is that with an ink with a quill in it or something? Mike Huff. Anyway, he's going to tell you a little bit about Memphis history and a little bit about University of Memphis, and then we're going to have some Q&A. And I know you folks all have your questions ready. So stand right in front. We're going to film you, Jimmy. Tell these folks everything they wanted to know about their town.
Can't do that. 40 minutes. I'm happy to be here. I say I'm happy to be anywhere. In fact, I'm just happy, you know. And I kind of am. I'm lived in Memphis all my life. Grew up about a mile from over here. Went to PDS, MUS, Rose College, Southwestern at the time, Memphis State at the time. So on the 10-year plan, going through college, if you know what that means, for one degree, you know. But when you find your degree, I was wanting to be a coach, but I ended up getting in Parks and Recreation. I got an education degree, municipal recreation emphasis. Only history class I took in my life, I took from Dr. Crawford, who's still teaching here. That was in 1973, you know. At that time, it was still a vehicular campus, too. You know, it's the nice pedestrian campus now. You know, maybe you're used to it and don't realize what it used to be. And cars are driving through all those streets in front of the administration building and everything. And I get a lot of visitors from out of town who come out to McWhirter or Rose Theater or something, and they marvel how pretty this campus is over here. So good for them on that. Then I went to work at the Memphis Park Commission as a special events supervisor for the recreation department, all the playgrounds and community centers, and doing things like junior police chief contest or the bicycle derby or the safety song and speech contest, you know. Kids are writing things for the junior police chief contest. Why I want to be junior police chief in 50 words or less. I had to read 6,000 essays in a week and pick out 12 for interviews, you know. It was fun. Then I went up through the Park Commission to be administrative manager, then deputy director. So we're running the zoo and the Pink Palace and Liberty Bowl Stadium and 4,000 acres of parkland and 4,300 athletic teams and 25 community centers, 16 swimming pools, just all over the place. It's a lot of fun. And I got shipped down to Mud Island back in 1985, became general manager there. I was there for 8 years on the riverfront. Did 5 years at Memphis Queen Line Riverboats, 3 years at Beale Street, run the operations of Beale Street, and then I was fortunate that the Smithsonian Institution asked me to be the director of the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum when it opened in 2000 at the Gibson Guitar Factory. And I started writing the Gibson Guitar Factory tours as well, and doing them. So I started talking a lot more like this. I mean, when I was a kid, I was always talking too much, getting in trouble in church or in school, or not making good grades and things like that. So I kind of, you know, sometimes you find your own niche later on in life and you see where you're starting off when you're a kid. So you might have some of that in you still. So kind of follow that track a little bit. Don't shut it off too much. And I worked 6 years for a sports and marketing agency, and then the last 5 years at Beale Street Landing. But in 2011, you know, for 3 years, we hadn't had overnight passenger vessels on the Mississippi River. The recession years we had there from 2007 to 2011 or so, that company went out of business. The American Queen, Mississippi Queen, and Delta Queen. They would cruise from New Orleans to Memphis to St. Louis to Minneapolis to Cincinnati to Nashville, 5-day cruises coming in and out of Memphis. And they all went away. And a company wanted to reform after the recession kind of got over. And City of Memphis gave them or loaned them $11 million, which they paid back. They didn't give it to them. And found some investors here locally. And the American Queen Steamboat Company was formed in 2011. The American Queen is the largest riverboat ever built. You might have seen it on the river sometime. I mean, it's 420 feet long, about 90 feet wide, about 6 stories tall. You take the tallest building in Memphis and lay it in the water, like the 100 North Main building. That's how big that boat is. It holds 475 passengers and 175 crew, you know. So it's almost 700 people on that boat all the time. And we got that back in business. Now this year it's grown to where another company has 3 boats. This company has 2. We have 5 boats coming to Memphis now. About 25,000 people coming to the docks. That's about a $42 million annual economic impact for our city. And Hotel room nights, about 20,000 hotel room nights. Yes, sir.
Does it still travel to New Orleans?
New Orleans, or like in the spring of January, they lay up in January. February, March, you kind of do New Orleans, a couple of days out, a couple of days back. Starting in March, they start coming up here once every 2 weeks. March, April, May. Then as the weather gets nicer up north, they'll go Memphis up to St. Louis, and in June, July, August, they kind of hang out up in Minnesota, Ohio, because of the nice weather, because it gets too cold in the fall. You got the fall leaves changing, then they start coming back down here September, October, November, December, and on down to New Orleans and lay up. And that's kind of how they do it. They say in the industry, there's only one river in America. That's the lower Mississippi River. Not the upper Mississippi, not the Ohio, not the Mississippi, the lower Mississippi. And when I was doing the manifest on these boats, checking it, we had to charge them fees, and I'd have to count the numbers on their manifest, and they'd have the hometowns on the right side over here. So I always made a little thing with me. I'd look to see where these folks were coming from. Because us here locally kind of take our river for granted, kind of take our climate for granted, the delta, the things we have here, the heat, the humidity. But these other folks are coming from, 70% of these folks are coming from East Coast and West Coast America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Coming here. They're coming to the middle of America because it's so cool. Mark Twain, St. Louis, Memphis, Delta, New Orleans. The Civil War, civil rights, the music, barbecue, the food, all the culture here. In particular, the Europeans love the blues in the Delta and the rock and roll and soul out of Memphis with Sun and Stax. We really capitalize on that. So it's a reverse effect. We want to go to Hawaii, don't we? And we want to go to Europe. They want to come here. So we don't realize, I don't think we really realize how cool we are. And a lot of Memphians really don't, what we call staycate. They vacate. They go on vacations. They go to Orlando, which is great, or Dollywood. I was in Dollywood 2 weeks ago. But if we had more Memphians staying at home and going to the National Civil Rights Museum, the Graceland, the Sun Studio, and the Zoo, and Pink Palace, and there's 17 museums in downtown now. They would have a really good time learning about what our city is and how culturally significant it is. About 10 years ago, I started a sidewalk walking program, sidewalk tour walking program. I was working in an office, and the Center City Commission at the time, now the Downtown Memphis Commission, had a program on Thursdays called Downtown Alive. And in Court Square, they had free music and free dance. And you bring your brown bag lunch out and eat and get entertained, and you go back to work. And I went to them and said, you don't have a lecture component to this or a tour component. I'd be glad to do that for you. I had a little itch on me. And I said, I could go over to Confederate Park and stand there and talk about the Mississippi River for 45 minutes, in a couple of weeks, and you'll get 30 people want to listen to it, wouldn't you? Yeah. And I'll do it for free. All you gotta do is promote me. Can't tell me what to say, because you might do something wrong, and I'll talk about you. And they said, no, we're gonna stick with the music. And I was like, wow, we'll do something free, walking tours downtown. So I said, I used to run the riverboat company, and that family made those last two boats they had, the Island Queen and the Memphis Queen 3. They made them from scratch in their backyard, built a hole in the backyard, moved with a house mover down the street to launch it in McKellar Lake, towed it up to the cobblestones, welded out the first, second, third deck, smokestacks, and pilot house. Took them 3 years to build those boats from scratch, the family and crew. We could go in the pilot house and ring the bell. We could trip on those old cobblestones, And they said no. So I've been living downtown for 20 years. So I said, well, how about a manhole cover tour? They went to me and said, okay. Well, I didn't have a manhole cover tour. I just had to get them to say yes for something, something you just don't know it. So I said, okay, I'll get back with you tomorrow. And that night I went home. Now, I'd lived downtown for 20 years and walked every sidewalk, street, park, plaza, alley. I'd take a rubber ball and throw it up against the walls. When I moved into downtown in '86 at Paperworks, the building next door to me was Self's Cricket Ranch, and they were incubating 30 million crickets a year for zoos and bait shops around the country. It's literally me and the crickets downtown 30 some odd years ago. It's really empty down there. All those buildings you see are filling in now. It's incredible. So I got to walk around a lot, and I started noticing the manhole covers on the street and the odd shapes and sizes and ornamentation. So I started taking pictures. So I'll do a photographic exhibit called Art in the Gutter. And I go to Mississippi River Museum and do that. They let me do exhibits over there. And I still haven't done that exhibit yet. But in my comparative study between the pyramid and the train station and Wolf River and say Gayoso Bayou or Danny Thomas Boulevard, there's about 2,000 manhole covers in downtown Memphis. There's 157 different kinds, okay, by my comparative pictures. There's 3 different shapes, round, square, and rectangular. There's 7 different usages: gas, plumbing, electric, storm drain, sewer, traffic signal, and telephones, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Some over 100 years old, some weigh over 100 pounds, all sorts of ornamentation. There's 37 ways you can say Memphis in a manhole cover downtown by the shape of the font or the letters or whatever thing, 21 different foundry names. And I just thought it'd be a quirky way to get somebody's attention to do a history tour. So I called them back the next day. I picked one street, Union Avenue, from Riverside to the Peabody Hotel, because there's a lot of history in there. And I called them up and say, make it the Great Union Avenue Manhole Cover and History Tour. 12 noon, May 9th, 2008. Meet at the Cotton Museum, Front Union, and we'll go from there. And they put that on the website. And the deal was, they don't pay me, you got to promote me, you can't tell me what to say. And the bet was I could have more people on the manhole cover tour than they could in their program the next day at Court Square. So they put it on the website. The next day, the commercial appeal calls me and goes, "You're not taking people down in the manholes, are you?" And I said, "No, ma'am, that's against the law." And I would never do anything against the law, would I, Chris?
Well, not knowingly.
Oh, well, even knowingly, I might not either. But I said, "Why don't you come out and let me show you what we're going to do, and I'll tell you how this works." And they came out, and they saw it was a history tour, and they took pictures of some of that ornamental iron in those covers. And the next day, there was 4 big pictures in the commercial appeal compared to covers. The next day, we had 91 people on the tour and 2 TV stations. And I went, ha, a star is born. We outdrew the other folks. So our deal was, they can't pay me, and I had to give 12 different tours for the next 12 weeks. I went home every night that next 12 weeks and rode a different tour, like Beale Street, South Main, Court Square and surroundings, Pinch District, River Bluff Walk, Cotton Row, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, just all sorts of tours like that. And then I started doing 3-hour tours linked together, 3 45-minute tours. So these are 45-minute tours that are 4 to 6 blocks long. And I got a real good mind for names and numbers and dates and figures and things like that. So that's kind of what this tour is about. When you look at buildings and look at the alleys and the naming, like General Washburn's Escape Alley, that's a great name, or November the 6th, 1934 Street. Do you have any idea why we have a November the 6th, 1934 Street, Memphis? Well, back in 1934, our city decided to join TVA Power. So we voted on November the 6th, 1934 to join TVA Power.
Were you there?
No, I wasn't there. And so that was a FDR program, a Democratic program, trying to get the country back out of the Depression. It was controversial because Tennessee Valley Authority was a large rural program, East Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, West Tennessee, up to Paducah. We were a large urban center, so in the 1950s, the Republican Eisenhower administration tried to kick us off with the Yates-Dixon Act, and that's when we built the Allen Steam Plant to pick up our increased demand because our city was growing. And we stayed on it, and we're still the largest customer of TVA today. Now, the rest of the story is November the 6th, 1934 is the only street in America named after a month, a day, and a year. Look at, there's no July 4th, 1776 in Boston or Philadelphia, or July 20th, 1969 when we landed on the moon. It's when Memphis voted to join TVA Power. That's kind of a goofy reason, don't you think? So if you look down at those signs right now, currently, they say November the 6th. They don't have 1934 on them. So when we're through with this MLK 50 stuff and this bicentennial stuff and this monument stuff, November the 6th, we're going to do a march on City Hall to get 1934 put back on the signs. Because it goes from Beale Street up to Shadiac and the pitch is 17 blocks long. Would y'all like to help me with that march, protest that? I mean, there's important things we got to protest about right here. It's the only street in America and maybe the world named after a month, a day, of the year. We've cut November the 6th off. In fact, if you go on the downtown Memphis site today, I sent my schedule in for the walking tours. They showing the picture of me holding an original November the 6th, 1934 street sign. That's black and white, standing on the fountain there at Court Square,
You didn't want to hold a manhole cover?
No, they're heavy. I told the commercial appeal that people might get down there, they might get hurt, they might get stuck, dirty, they might get stuck, and they're heavy, and it's against the law. Later on, I'd gotten kind of bored. I've been on every, like I say, sidewalk, street, park, plaza, alley, rooftop. What was the last great adventure for Jimmy Ogle in downtown Memphis? The Gayoso Bayou. Have you ever heard the Gayoso Bayou? Our downtown is shaped like a football. the north-south's the long end of the football, the east-west, the fat end of the football. It drains on Front Street, it drains into the Mississippi River to the west. It drains down to Danny Thomas Boulevard to the east. And it goes back up to the medical center, so all the medical center drains down the Gales Bayou. You go over that, you got the Quimby Bayou, you got a series of bayous out here. In fact, Poplar Avenue right here is an old high ridge. And centuries ago, when the animals were wandering around here, Memphis is on the highest piece of ground on the Mississippi River between Cairo and Natchez. You got that? Used to flood 35 miles in that direction in Arkansas every year. Now it's only about 4 because we built levees this way. So the animals would come up on this high ground here in Memphis, the Fourth Chickasaw Bluffs, to keep their little paws dry. And they'd walk out to the east or the southeast on the high ridge. Wolf River would swell up. Now, kind of, you've seen them swell up and come up in the land. So they were on the high, dry ground. Then the Native Americans followed them, the European explorers followed them, the American settlers followed them, and then we paved Poplar. It's just an old animal trail. And so is Lamar. And all of them head right summer, all head to that one high point in downtown Memphis. How many of y'all like this railroad track over here? You should have said yes to this by now. You've heard this story enough.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well,
Love it.
back in 1857, that railroad track right there was the first railroad to connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Mississippi River in the history of our country.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. You said wow?
Wow.
All right, good to go. This is Pavlov's theory of reinforcement. You said wow?
I did.
It's a little duck pin right there. That was a big deal because at that time most railroads were about 100 miles long. There was no national network. This was almost 800 miles long. It was like going to the moon at the time comparatively. You're riding a horse and buggy, 10 miles an hour. Now you get on a train, 60 miles an hour with all this capacity. So it was such a big deal. They brought water from the Atlantic Ocean and sprayed it to the Mississippi River, and took water from the Mississippi River and sprayed it to the Atlantic Ocean. They called it the wedding of the waters, the greatest day of human jubilee in the history of the lower Mississippi River Valley. That was May of 1857. And that's that railroad track right there that y'all love, I know. It's not in your way. You are in its way. It was here first. Downtown, Fairgrounds, Button, Normal, White Station, Germantown, Collierville, Grand Junction, Holly Springs, Corinth, Huntsville. They all grew up around that railroad track. That's that. In the 1840s and 50s and 60s, we started laying cobblestones down on the wharf down there. You'll still see those cobblestones down. You've seen that old cobblestone wharf. There's about 1 million cobblestones still down there. You'd get off a steamboat in Memphis, and you go down in that mud, you go down about knee deep, you pull your leg out, it suck your shoe or boots off. It wasn't a friendly way to come to Memphis. The mules down there, the cotton bales, it was just, the water would rise and fall. Our water fluctuates 40 feet here during the course of the year. And that slope is a 6-to-1 slope. So that water line moves 240 feet. And think about this, the Mississippi River here drains 41% of continental North America. That's 31 states and 2 provinces of Canada. So basically everything between the Rocky Mountains and the Smoky Mountains drains through here at about an average of 330,000 gallons a minute, about 8 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour, and every gallon of water has a teaspoon of mud in it. That's why this is the flattest place on earth through here. The delta has been oozing out like this over the years. It drops 1 foot in elevation per mile from the tip of Illinois down in New Orleans. That rich alluvial soil has made this great farming land in here. In the 19th century, we had 400 sawmills in this area. We're the hardwood capital of the world. After we cut all the trees, we started planting cotton. So from 1880 to 1920, 70% of the cotton crop in America was within 200 miles of Memphis. We're the cotton capital of the world. We were trading 75,000 mules a year here. We're the mule capital of the world during all that time. From 1803 to 1937, cotton was the #1 export out of our country. That's how big the economy was built around cotton. Right now, between Memphis and Little Rock, 45% of the rice in America grows. So it's a big rice country over there. And again, this flyway here, this Mississippi flyway, 70% of the migratory waterfowl in this country migrate from up there in the north all the way down to South America. That's about 300 species of birds annually. There's 95 species of fish in that river. Over 80 miles to our west is Stuttgart, Arkansas. The World Championship duck calling contests are there. And 60 miles to our east is Grand Junction, where we have the National Bird Dog Museum. Europeans look at me kind of funny when I say we have a bird dog museum. They go, that's not culture. Yeah, here it is. 120 years of the Ames Plantation field trials, Bass Pro's worldwide headquarters in Shelby Farms. That's why it makes sense to put that Bass Pro stuff in the pyramid there. There's a lot of hunting, fishing, outdoor camping opportunities here. based on just our ecosystem in this area. It's a pretty fantastic place. You know, we get the training here. A little history here. The Civil War comes to Memphis. The Union strategy is get control of the western rivers because it was railroads and boats at that time. No automobiles, no planes. So Memphis being this high piece of dry ground with that railroad in here, the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, all the steamboats coming in. So in 1862, the Union fleet came down the river. The Confederate fleet met right out in front of Memphis there. And 5,000 citizens came out and sat on the banks of the Mississippi River and watched the naval battle of Memphis like it was an NFL football game or a fireworks show. Only in Memphis would you do this. They were shooting each other in the river, not on the land. There was no land approaches here. That battle took 90 minutes because it was such a mismatch, but it was the largest inland naval battle in the history of the world. Right here in Memphis, Tennessee, of all places. And we were quickly a northern occupied town, very strategic town. Sherman planned to march to the sea. Grant planned part of the Battle of Vicksburg. Here we housed over 7,000 wounded Union soldiers here in our warehouses and hospitals and hotels. That's the start of our great hospital tradition here. First Tennessee Bank opened here because it was under martial law. It was controlled both north and south. Business was so good they opened their bank here, the 14th oldest bank charter in America. Think about that. War's over with. The quickest way to get Union soldiers back upriver from the battle was by steamboat. Certificates were relaxed. Captains were incentivized, $5 for every enlisted man, $10 for every officer. Ever heard of the boat called the Sultana? It went down. It was certificated for 376 passengers, and by the time it made it back from Natchez and Vicksburg to Memphis, it had over 2,300 passengers on it. 6 times its legal limit. 100 horses and 1 stove. How'd you like to be in this room with another 300 people and say 5 horses for 10 days? You wouldn't like that, would you? They went upriver, the boilers were faulty, the boilers blew in the middle of the night, April 27th, 1865. Bodies flowed by Memphis for days. Over 1,700 people lost their life. The largest maritime disaster in the history of our country. April 27th, 1865. 200 more than the Titanic. I know you've heard of the Titanic. You've seen that movie, you know. But it was a luxury liner with all the attention in 1912 or whatever. You know, what the Civil War couldn't do to Memphis, we say the mosquito did. We were untouched. No buildings burned. Atlanta, Montgomery, all these other towns in the South got burned down. We were totally untouched. We're the fastest growing city after the Civil War. You get up in the 1870s, and the Yellow Fever Epidemic comes up the river. At 1878, we had 40,000 people start the summer. 25,000 left immediately. Of the 15,000 left behind, 5,000 died. So we had 10,000 people. We lost 3/4 of our population in 1 month. Went into bankruptcy for 14 years. We weren't even known as the city of Memphis. We're the taxing district of West Tennessee. Picked up the dead, filth in the street, buried bodies. 1880, a man by the name of George Waring came to town. He thought it'd be a good idea to separate the sewage water from the drinking water. Thought that'd be a healthy thing to do. We formed our Board of Health too, you know. 1887. We're the model for the industrial sanitary sewer in the country. I knew you wanted to know that today. Right? I know you did. 1887, we found our first artesian well, 352 feet down, right there at Court and Thomas. Curiously, on the same land Thomas Edison used to live on. He lived in Memphis in the 1860s. And that gave us a good source of clean drinking water, those artesian wells below us, which we brag about to this day. We just basically have an unlimited source of great drinking water here. And like I said, we really brag about that today. So that's what got us that. Railroads started coming in. We built the first bridge across the river. That's a funny story. And then 1904, we had 8 automobiles. By 1930, we had 52,000. So we had to build more bridges, and cars were coming. We expanded out this way. Out here, this place opened in 1912. West Tennessee's Normal School was the name. It's had 5 names. City limits came out to Goodlet and Graham in 1929 and White Station in 1950. So the first 17 years Memphis State's open over here, it was outside the city limits as a, kind of an odd deal. They had to bring the supplies to build the administration building in Minders Hall up the train line to get here. A train line you don't like, you know. In fact, if you look at Minders Hall, well, that's a different story as well. You get on up into things like 1916, Memphis changed the way the world shopped for groceries. We opened the first self-service grocery store, Piggly Wiggly, in downtown Memphis at Main and Jefferson. Before that time, you would come to you're the clerk, you'd come to the counter, I'd come to the counter, I'd give you the money, you go back and get the groceries, you bring them back to me, I give you my money, after I give you my list, and I walk out. And Clarence Saunders saw that. He said, well, now you're sitting down, you're wasting a lot of time. That's a lot of loss of manpower. So what he did, he put a turnstile up. You can go see it over at the Pink Palace. They got a replica of the Piggly Wiggly. And you walk through the turnstile, and he went through aisle by aisle. How would you like to go through the grocery store today and you have to go aisle by aisle, every aisle? How many murders you think there'd be in a grocery store right now? People, get out of the way. You know, and the milk would still be in the very back, right? You know, and maybe you can walk by everything to buy milk and buy other stuff. So that was the big innovation right there, 1916. And 1952, you go downstairs 2 floors, you'll see a story about a man named Kenneth Wilson. He changed the way the world traveled here in Memphis, Tennessee. Opened the first overnight roadside lodging chain out on Summer Avenue, Holiday Inn. Great story down there, great museum. I send people here all the time. You know, in the 1960s, a man from Memphis went to Yale and he got a C- on a term paper for the idea of overnight package delivery by air. Yeah. Now, you millennials call it FedEx, right? We call it Federal Express, us old folks, you know. He opened Federal Express here, millennial. It's now FedEx, but he employs, 32,000 people in Memphis now, and 400,000 people worldwide. You know, we really altered that whole industry there. In 1979, Pitt Hyde opened Auto Shack, got sued by Radio Shack, changed the name to AutoZone. Now there's 6,000 AutoZones and no Radio Shacks, you know. That's another great innovation here. Our medical things, Dr. Campbell wrote the seminal manual for orthopedic medicine. It's still used to this day. It's in the 10th edition. University of Tennessee came here in 1911, the medical school. Baptist opened in 1912. Methodist 1921. Labana was a sewing circle of little old ladies sewing clothes for orphans in 1923 with red thread. That's one of the largest pediatric facilities in the country now. And then it's Shea Ear Clinic, Southern College of Optometry, International Children's Heart Foundation. In the last 23 years, they've performed over 7,000 operations in 31 countries for children 30 days or younger that have congestive heart disease. They take teams over and do that. It's the 4th largest provider of that in the world. It's a great thing. Babyheart.org is what it's called. And some of those kids that they did save 22 years ago are coming back to work for them now as nurses and stuff like that. And of course, in 1962, Danny Thomas came to Memphis, founded St. Jude, had a less than 4% success rate that year and a $1 million budget for the entire year. And now that success rate has grown to be about 90%, but it costs $3 million a day to run that hospital. And remember now, no child or parent pays for their travel, their treatment, their housing, their food on any visit to Memphis. That's the true miracle of Memphis. And they're ready to do another $1 billion expansion up there. It's pretty remarkable. I was sitting up at Westie's the other day, and this guy was sitting over here and he watched the carriage go by out the window. He said, I used to ride those carriages when I was a kid at St. Jude 25 years ago. And Jake Shore would give him free carriage rides in like he does there. Well, there's Jake over there. Go tell him thank you. He says one of his great memories when he was here at St. Jude. What they're doing now, they're bringing people back that were here 20 and 30 and 40 years ago and doing tests so you'll know, or whoever the little kids will know, of some of the residual. He was going numb in his fingertips or something. It might have to do something with his treatment or something. They're trying to continue on the story as these people live long life. What are the after effects of St. Jude treatment? I think that's a pretty neat story there. Let's see. So that's transportation, distribution, logistics is our #1 industry in Memphis. We're the #2 inland port on the Mississippi River. We're one of 3 cities that have all 5 Class 1 freight rail operators in it. We're I-40 and I-55 crossing West Memphis. That's the 3rd largest center of trucking activity. Crittenden County apparently sells more diesel fuel than anybody in America. And then our airport's the #1 cargo airport in America, and basically the world the last 30 years with FedEx out there. Transportation, logistics, #1. Hospitals and healthcare is our #2 employee. Hospitality and tourism is #3. Think about that, the attractions and growing. The hotels, the restaurants, the travel industry, the cabs, the Ubers, whatever you want to call them, the buses. When we have a American Queen steamboat comes in, we got to go down there with 6 golf carts, get about 600 suitcases up before 7 o'clock in the morning, and then about 450 old folks up by 9 o'clock, and they'll go out. And then here comes the provisions in. The Cisco truck comes in, Palazola Produce, American Seafood. We take 1,000 boxes down to stock the boat. Here comes the barge from a county boat store. They'll take on between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of fuel. That's a hefty fuel bill right there. You haven't bought that much fuel in your life, probably.
You're right.
Okay. Then the other suitcases will come down for the people going out and getting on the boat. They've been in town for 2 days, going to the hotels. Here's 100 cabs coming through. Here's 30 buses coming through. They get down there by 5 and they cast off. So that's kind of the turnaround. And look at all the things it touches in the provisioning and hotels, restaurants, attractions. 1948, We opened the first all-black formatted radio station in the world, WDIA, on Union Avenue. Rufus Thomas and B.B. King were two of the first DJs. Sam Phillips liked that raw, gutsy blues music, so opened Memphis Recording Service at 706 Union Avenue, and he was recording black artists like B.B. King and Howlin' Wolf and Johnny Ace and Rufus Thomas. What Rufus told me, Sam was looking for a white boy who could sing black music. Of course, that was Elvis, who had walked up and down Beale Street, saw Arthur Crudup sitting on a pickle bucket singing "That's All Right, Mama." He just sped it up a little bit one night, July 5th, 1954. From 1949 to 1958, Dewey Phillips was at the Chisco Hotel on WHBQ playing music by white artists and music by black artists on the same radio station in the South, in the same hour. It was unheard of at the time. You didn't mix the music like that. And much less did black and white kids singing groups together like Booker T and the MGs. That happened over at Stax. So he played Elvis' song that night, and it had to play it over 15 times because people kept on calling in for it. So that's the first time an Elvis record played from the mezzanine, WHBQ. And then in 1955, this Kimmons Wilson right here in Sam Phillips and Son Studio thought it'd be a good idea to put a microphone in front of a woman and let her talk on the radio. What were they thinking? Huh? They picked 8 ladies. It was WHER, 1,000 beautiful watts. So not only did we break the color barrier in radio in Memphis, Tennessee for our country, we broke the gender barrier in radio in Memphis, Tennessee for our country at the Holiday Inn at 3rd and Crump, 1955. Then in 1958, a white brother and sister, Jim Stewart and Estelle Axton, opened Satellite Records out in Brunswick, Tennessee, got sued for the name. They bought the Capitol Theater on McLemore, took the first 2 letters of their last name, the ST of Stewart, the AX of Axton, and made Stax. And that's where that name comes from. 800 singles, 300 albums. Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Isaac Hayes, Booker T and the MGs, Wilson Pickett, Eddie Floyd, Soul Man, Hold On, I'm Coming, sitting on the dock of the bay. Blacks and whites working in the studio together when they couldn't eat at a lunch counter together or go to a movie theater together till the 1960s. 1959, there's a marker we put over here right by the administration building. Memphis State 8, first 8 black students to join. I'll be allowed to come into Memphis State. In other cities in the country, the desegregation of public schools was done mostly with high school students, and they were always getting in fights, the blacks and whites were, like in Little Rock and stuff like that. So the Memphis branch of the NAACP in 1961 said, we'll do it with first graders. Those first graders, I got a 5-year-old and 9-year-old grandkids, they're kind of bobbleheads, you know, they'll do anything, go anywhere, they're not going to get in fights or cuss or all this stuff, throw things. And so they interviewed 200 first graders in Memphis and selected 13. It's called the Memphis 13. They probably traumatized 13 kids for the rest of their life, but they were the first 13 to go into first grade here at Bruce, Roselle, Gordon, and Springdale Elementary Schools. We put historical markers up there 3 years ago. We call them pint-sized pioneers. We got to meet with 9 of them when we did historical markers. You got to hear their stories and everything. It's really dramatic. You can fast forward into the 60s. There's a marker we put down there across from where Jolly Roy lives at Main and Gayoso for the Lee sisters. They were the most arrested family in America in the 1960s, according to Jet Magazine, for their nonviolent sit-ins of lunch counters, white lunch counters, department stores in Memphis. We were writing a text with them in this very building here. We always have our text meetings here. And they were talking to the sisters here. Some weren't old enough to go to jail, so they had to go to juvie. They got kind of put down because they weren't old enough to go to jail. You know, they'd go home, they get out of jail, they switch dresses and go to different places, libraries and stuff, get rearrested again. You know, Elaine Lee Turner is one of our leading heritage tour operators here in Memphis, and so her sister's there. You know, in 1968, right here, Colonial Middle School area, the sanitation workers. Working conditions weren't the same. The white workers, if it rained or something like that, could stay on and do bit work and get paid, while the black workers were sent home. It was just unequal standards. They were trying to get represented. They weren't allowing that. So one day, February 1st, 1968, it started raining, and 2 of the workers on a truck crew got up in the back of a truck over here, and it activated. They got crushed to their death on the job. And when the way the city responded, not being sensitive to that and being tough about it. So the black sanitation workers said, that's enough, we've had it. We're walking out. So that's when the sanitation strike, you heard a lot about it this month, I'm sure, in the next couple of days. So they went on strike, the garbage piled up. I was in the 10th grade. I remember a lot of this, 68. And the garbage piled up. The mayor says you can't go on strike, it's a state law, but it's still piled up. They got Dr. King to come to Memphis to help with that cause. He was preparing for the March on Washington that summer. March 28th he came here. March 22nd he came, but we had 16 inches of snow, so it got canceled in March. So he came back March 28th and marched from Claiborne Temple. And they started that march. Now, If you've seen the pictures where they hold the I'm a Man posters like this, and then you'll see that great picture by Ernest Withers where they have them on the stakes, all standing up in front of Claiborne Temple like this across the street. Ernest Withers, who took 1.8 million pictures in 60 years of black Memphis here, socials, Negro League baseball, politicians, music, everything, cultural life of Memphis. Withers' collection down on Beale Street's a great museum. And I got to be friends with him at the Rock and Soul. He told me this story. He said, Jimmy, we knew there was going to be trouble the next day. The white rednecks didn't want Dr. King in town stirring things up, and the black radicals didn't think he was moving fast enough with his nonviolent, peaceful protests, the Invaders and the Black Panthers. So we knew there was going to be trouble the next day, so we took those posters, we nailed them to the stakes, so when the trouble broke out the next day, they could pull the posters off and have something to defend themselves with. And that's the story behind that one picture. That's the last march of Dr. King, happened March 28, 1968. Broken up right there at Manningham. So he came back a week later, stayed at the black-owned Lorraine Motel because he got criticized for staying at the Rivermont, and the Rivermont didn't want anything to do with it because we had windows smashed and things like that. We went into curfew at Tanks on Bill. So he came back April 3rd. The court order had been lifted so he could give the march or take it again. So that night he went down to Mason Temple about a mile south of there and gave the last speech of his life in Memphis, Tennessee. I've been to the mountaintop. You can stand on the roof of Peabody Hotel and see all these sights. Because you can look right down there and see the National Civil Rights Museum. So they came back the next day. They were waiting for the court order to be lifted. Lucius Birch and Mike Cody and Andrew Young went down to the federal office building. It got lifted. Mike brought Andrew Young back to the hotel, dropped him off, and before the time he got home, he heard on the radio Dr. King had been shot. So that court order was lifted that day. It could have not happened just if it had lifted the day before, or maybe that madman was going to chase him anywhere and finally get him. James O'Reilly. So he was shot. And Dr. Cowles, I got to meet with Dr. Cowles. He was on the balcony that night, room 306, when it happened. They were waiting on Jesse Jackson. Jesse was always late, they said, you know. And when Jesse got there, Martin goes, "You're not dressed right to go to Miss Cowles' house tonight for dinner." He didn't have a coat and tie on. Jesse says, "My dress code don't dictate my appetite, my stomach does." And Martin rolled his eyes and he walked out on the room, out onto the balcony. He looked down, he saw Ben Branch down there in the parking lot. Now, Ben Branch was a saxophone player. We have his saxophone in the Rock and Soul Museum. And he always played Precious Lord as one of the songs. And he says, "Play Precious Lord tonight, play it real pretty for me." And that's when the shot rang out. And he fell back into Dr. Cowles' arms, laid him down. Dr. Cowles ran inside to the operator-assisted telephone. The operator heard that. She'd run out. She had a stroke. She died 3 days later. And he was already dead, so they took him to St. Joseph Hospital, and right around the corner at 374 Van Street, there's R.S. Lewis and Sons Funeral Home. That's where his body was taken. We've done a historical marker there for preparation for a day of viewing in Memphis before he went back to Atlanta. Miss King comes back, completes the march, and the site gets saved in the 1980s. 1991, it opened the National Civil Rights Museum. In 2002, it expanded across the street. 2013 did about a $30 million upgrade. It's one of the finest museums in the country. The whole world's going to be here. It's the site of the most watershed moment in the history of the Civil Rights Movement. You've heard of MLK50.com right now and all the activities. Today, we did a historical marker at 968 Marr Street, North Memphis today, Joe C. Warren's house. You'll see it on the news tonight. And we had to do it indoors because it was raining, but we had 6 of those. Mr. Nickelberry's there. He's worked for the sanitation department for 64 years, and he's still working. He's one of those guys in 68 on the strike, and some of the other workers were there. We dedicated this marker. That's one of the homes they would organize the sanitation meetings. Because in the 60s, you could go to a funeral home or a church to organize, and the whites who wanted to disrupt you wouldn't touch those two places, like R.S. Lewis and Sons Funeral Home or Beale Street Baptist Church. So it's pretty risky to go to a residence to do that. But that was one of the houses that was used. It's right next to the MLGMW compound, so it got saved, the house did. So we dedicated that marker today. Miss Freeman from the Civil Rights Museum was there. And so you're going to see a lot of activities leading up to April 3rd. The King family will be here for the speech at Mason Temple. April 4th will be the 50th anniversary, a commemoration, not a celebration, but a commemoration of Dr. King's life. And you know what, I think his ideals ultimately led to his death because he was about nonviolent, peaceful protest. I don't think he'd like some of these protest actions we have now. He would not march down that street. He would not break the law. He said, we got to do this peacefully, nonviolence. And waiting that out, when you think about it and the circumstances around it, certainly opened it up to where it wasn't good for him. So we have that here. We look at the Civil Rights Trail right now, that area from from Main Street to Beale Street to Crump to east out by the hospital. It's called the Heritage Trail. That's going to be opening up. They have an app for it. They're going to have a trail. They're going to have tours. They're doing things like the MLK Reflection Site, I'm a Man Plaza, Universal Life, Foot Homes, places where Robert B. Church, the first millionaire, lived. Ida B. Wells, who wrote about the anti-lynching crusades. We've done several lynching marches here recently. MIFA was formed 50 years ago. They're in that area there, Metropolitan Interfaith Association, a black and white ecumenical group to help solve race relations in Memphis 50 years ago. They do a lot of work in Memphis. So this Heritage Trail is opening. And the spirit of the Civil Rights Museum right now is not just talking about the history, but trying to, what are we going to do the next 50 years? Well, how far have we come in 50 years or not? And what can youth do now to make a bigger, better change? I think Ms. Freeman has the right attitude about trying to do better over the next our lifespan here, let's say. We say we're home of the blues, birthplace of rock and roll, cradle of soul, crossroads of America's music. We're the home of the independent spirit. We're the center of the known universe is what I call it when I do my talks. I say there's no city in America that tells a story of American history better than Memphis, Tennessee, good, bad, or ugly. When you look at the early Native Americans and European explorers to the 20th century entrepreneurs, from Civil War to civil rights, music, medicine, transportation, distribution, all the firsts, all the highlights. We got 500 good years of history here. I think I got 150 hours in my head. And that's why I talk so fast because I got 40 minutes to talk about it. But I come back all the time and I go to schools and senior citizen homes and do backstories of music or do themed programs. I got 30 PowerPoints. And we do a lot of that. It's just so, I learn something new every day when I go out to these senior homes and hear people tell me their stories. And, it's just a neat thing to be involved in our history. In Memphis, when you look at Grayson's, the second most visited house in the country, Sun Studio is the most famous recording studio in the world, Stax Museum of American Soul Music, the opening film is worth the price of admission alone. It's so good. And that charter school they have here, the last 7 years, 100% of the students out of that neighborhood have gotten college scholarships. 100% right to college. That's how effective Stax and their charter school is over at Soulsville over there. You know, Beale Street, you know, in 1970, you've been to the Peabody Hotel. I'll close with this. You've been to the Peabody Hotel. You think about it, it was closed in 1975, bought on the courthouse steps for $540,000. The whole Peabody Hotel. Jack Belts told me outbid Prince Mongo for the Peabody Hotel. It'd been playing at Zambodia for real, you know. 1970, and they spent $25 million in 5 years restoring it and reopened in 1981. Now from 1977 to 1983, have y'all been to Beale Street? Oh, you've been to Beale Street. It was totally fenced off. You couldn't walk or ride down Beale Street. There was one business open, A. Schwab, and you had to enter from the alley. That's why its name's on the back of the building there. And by 1979, there was more people living in jail in downtown Memphis than living residentially. And our political leaders wanted to build a bigger jail. Duh. We built the only building in Memphis, you know by its number.
201.
Get that on film there.
Yeah, this
Fingerprinting before he gets out of here. Yeah, 201. And the Belches and the Turleys said, no, we got to bring this downtown back. And year by year, Peabody opened 81, Mud Island 82, Beale Street partially in 83. The Orpheum Theater was saved for $280,000. This is going to be torn down to be a parking garage in 1976. In 1982, the Lorraine was saved for $144,000. For less than $1 million in a 6-year period of time, we saved the Peabody, the Lorraine, and the Orpheum in downtown Memphis. Now there's 25,000 people living downtown, over 110 restaurants, 17 great museums, a lot of them off the beaten path. The National Ornamental Metal Museum, the next closest metal museum is in Japan. That's how special that place is on the South Bluffs, you know. So there's a lot of tourist love coming to Memphis. We got about 11 million a year now or something like that. $3.5 million
11.5
billion economic impact.
3.3 billion.
There you go. So we really do good in the restaurants, the attractions, the hospitality industry. Our zoo's one of the top 5 zoos in the country, one of 4 in the country to have a set of pandas. You know, the Big End Bridge is the longest freestanding letter of the alphabet in the world. It's 1,760 feet long. Nike distributes over 170 million pairs of shoes through here. You are number 1 in Nike world. You're in Memphis, Tennessee. Penny Hardaway's the number 2 shoe. Little Penny, back when Penny was doing in the pros, I was keeping a clock at the Pyramid. I used to do the score clock for the Tiger games and Grizzly games. And we had an all-star game here. And Chris Rock, who was the voice of Little Penny, he was the PA announcer, and I'm sitting next to him. I'm the clock operator. So they come out in the commercials. We pull a little penny out of the bag, and I get to hold a little penny while Chris Rock is talking, and I'm making him wiggle like he's alive, you know. So I got, you see my hand in those pictures. Chris Rock being Little Penny in the 1990s. So famous hand right here. Don't touch it.
Okay.
Little penny, got little penny juice on it. Michael Jordan's the #1 shoe, by the way. So, you know, the Grizzlies, we went and got the worst team in the history of the NBA, the quickest to lose 100, 200, 300 games in Vancouver. Then the second year they went to the playoffs, they lost 12 straight playoff games. So we set 2 records of utility here, built a new building. 3 years ago, they won the Beyond Sport Award. Every major league franchise in the world, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, hockey, they were #1 in community involvement. Still making the playoffs. They don't make playoffs this year, but they do other things besides just play basketball. I mean, that's your old Memphis Grizzlies. But we had the first ever Public Enemy #1 in Memphis, Tennessee. Machine Gun Kelly. You heard the song Sweet Caroline? I know you know that song. It was written at Peabody Hotel, recorded at American Studios in Memphis in 1969. That's Wayne Jackson and Andrew Love from Memphis doing the ba 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 that y'all do all the time, right? Sweet Caroline, ba ba ba. Go do that. That's Wayne Jackson and Andrew Love. They own 300 gold records, trumpet and sax. I could go on and on, you know that. Colleyville distributes more fishing lures than anybody. Bartlett, last year did 50 million 3D glasses for the solar eclipse. I thought that was the biggest rip-off since Y2K. Nothing happened on Y2K. Y'all remember Y2K? All right.
I do.
We went from 99 to 2000, all the computers were supposed to stop and all the digital clocks were supposed to go crazy.
Yeah.
I was in Handy Park with B.B. King bringing in the millennium, you know. That's what he did. That day before, he was at Peabody doing the gala. That afternoon, the next day, he was at the Liberty Bowl doing the halftime show. He came down and did a 7:30 show at his club. We got him around midnight to 75-year-old man to Handy Park. We brought the Lindell in with B.B. King and Handy Bill to Crossroads of America. And the next day, he did 2 shows at the casinos in Tunica. And that Sunday, he was walking the mall with President Clinton. Amazing man, B.B. King. We can come back and talk about the music sometime. But Olive Branch makes more hotel miniature bar soap than anybody. Think about that. And our Kellogg's plant makes more frosted flakes than anybody in America. Have you seen the line roaring in the MGM movie? Logan, you know where he's from? Very good. he needs a duck pin, doesn't he? Very good. Every answer is Memphis. Yeah, he's 1937. His name is Bolney, B-O-L-N-E-Y, named after a French philosopher. Only in Memphis would you name your line after a French philosopher who visited Memphis. His stage name is Leo the Lion. If you listen real close to see what he's saying when he's roaring, if you listen, he goes, Memphis. That's the only lie I told all night. Everything else I said is true. He says roar, 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 roar. Even I can't get Memphis out of that. If you watch him next time, think about me. You know, last thing. Getwell Street over here. We built a Veterans Hospital over here in 1942, the largest general hospital in the country during World War II. We had a big World War II presence here. But the name of the street was Shotwell. Only in Memphis would you build a Veterans Hospital on a street named Shotwell near the intersection of Dunn. Shotwell and Dunn. So they changed it to Getwell. We got Shotwell between Southern and Park. There's a Shotwell. He was a landowner over here in Normal Station. We were doing a thing at Withers Collection during the month of February. Talk about it Tuesdays. Had like Judge Joe Brown. What an interesting guy he is. David A.C., African Naples, Otis Sanford, Jerome Wright. We had one of the bishops there tell this story. He talked about the fire hosing and the mace and the dogs on them in the 60s. And he started telling the story at the very end. He goes, you know, my bicycle got stolen from my church. And so one of the parishioners says, well, why don't you, when you go to church next Sunday, preach the 10 Commandments about thou shalt not steal. It's the number 2 commandment. And I bet you that the bike will show up within a week. Somebody would be guilted into bringing the bike back. You know, so he went, did his 10 Commandments thing. A week later, he met up with that guy that advised him to do that. Well, did you preach the 10 Commandments? He said, yeah. Well, what happened? Well, I got to the part about thou shalt not commit adultery, and I remembered where I left my bicycle. And he broke up everybody in the room because it's been so serious and everything. But, you know, these people, what we did in the 50s, 60s, no, it was a joke. I'm sorry. But he did say it. I don't think he really did that. But these are real people. I mean, we're all people. We're all human here. We're all Memphis. I've lived in Memphis for 65 years. You know, I've been in and out of everything. I'm the only person in the history of the city of Memphis to get a cease and desist order to not walk in storm drains. For my walking in the storm drains underground, got in trouble for that, you know.
I knew you knew where 201 Poplar was.
I had to go to 201 to the city attorney. I called him and said, "You're wrong. The mayor gave me permission. Nobody told me not to go in there. It's not dangerous." And the guy goes, "Well, I want to go down there with you." I said, "Well, let's go." You know, just can't take a picture of me underground, okay? I can walk you from St. Jude to FedEx Forum underground, these big old caverns in downtown Memphis. It's great. But this Memphis is a very unusual place. We are a tale of two cities in a way. We've had a very odd history. We're going to plow through it here. Good, bad, or ugly is what I say, you know.
Can you take a couple questions?
Sure.
Do you think that Memphis has the room, the land to expand hotels?
Yeah, plenty of it, particularly downtown. There's a lot of vacant
I
land.
mean downtown.
Yeah, there's plenty of vacant land downtown. There's, take a couple buildings down, aren't good anymore, you know. There's plenty of land
What
downtown.
do you think is going to happen to the tourist industry?
I think it's going to keep on growing. Grayson's the #2 visit house in the country. When we shut down the federal government, it makes them #1 because the White House closes, you know. Yeah, I think it's going to grow. We've done good the last 25 years. I don't know how much longer Kevin's going to be the president or whatever, but there'll be other people to carry on. Our product is strong. Grayson is growing. Sun Studio is growing. Stacks is growing. The Civil Rights Museum statues, everything's growing logarithmically. I think our riverfront with the passenger vessels, you know, are growing. People like coming to the middle of America for Americana, and we have a good product. And I'm told we're very friendly here. I mean, my tourists come in like Santa Claus. They drop in down the chimney. They're here for 2 or 3 days. They go to Graceland, they go to the Civil Rights Museum, they go to Beale Street. The purse doesn't get snatched. They don't watch the 10 o'clock news. They don't read the newspaper. They're gone in 3 days. They think they've been to Disneyland. You know, it's just one big Disneyland, but it's not all behind one fence. When you think about Graceland and the Civil Rights Museum and Sun and Stack, and all these things we have, the riverfront, the next closest local riverboat ride in America is in St. Louis or New Orleans. That's 1,300 miles of river. That's why a lot of people come to this river to do the local riverboat cruise. So we have some advantages like that, and our state is so diverse from the east, the middle, to the west too. I was up in Dollywood 2 weeks ago. Oh my goodness, in Gatlinburg and Sevierville and all that stuff. It's amazing what's going on up there. So I think we're primed right in the middle of the country. We'll always be strong tourism-wise because people love coming here from all over the world. It's not, if it was dependent on Memphis to support the tourism industry, we'd be in trouble. Because we can hardly get enough workers to work in these places that are competent, you know, with the skills. If you can't read and write, you can't put a can on a shelf. You know what I mean? When you think about the workforce here sometimes, and if you can't pass a drug test, you can't work, you know, in some of these places. It's just the hard facts of it. So I think we're going to be strong as long as we start mobilizing people in the workforce. That'll make us better. Our restaurants are strong. We get great reputation, great press now from all over the world in the restaurants. You can't match our cultural or heritage tourism at all.
Anything else for Jimmy?
You know, I'll talk, and I'll give a short answer too.
Favorite barbecue? Oh, sorry.
All of them.
This is clearly your passion.
Yeah.
When
Talking
did you
is,
think-
talking is the good stuff.
When did you decide to start this passion?
Well, I talked too much as a kid. Just get in trouble all the time.
But with the
Sitting at-
history,
History, 10 yeyears. 30 years ago, I started the Mississippi River Museum at Mud Island, because you have to know your product. You listen to those audiovisual programs all day long, it's just like you put a CD in your car, you know every word to every song. You probably know 500,000 songs. You know, you have the capacity. I just sing Memphis history rather than singing songs, you know, and I just repeat myself a lot, so it comes out pretty easy. I have an eye and a nose for going out and being able to see things. My sister used to say, if it wouldn't have been for the sports page of the commercial appeal, I wouldn't have learned how to read. You know, I was one of those guys in the box scores and the standings, so I know names and numbers and facts and places and years, and that's kind of how I function and program myself. Don't watch TV, don't do Facebook, read a lot of books, work a lot of crosswords, sleep a lot. When I fall and stop talking to myself, I sleep a lot. Kind of keep my head clear, because there's a lot of junk out there that interferes with it. It's kind of your computer, you got to delete, or things going to crash, you know. Just don't put all this stuff in or delete it out. Make sure what's going through your eyes and ears is meaningful, you know, and you like it. That makes you a happier person, I'm sure, you know.
Let's hear it for Jimmy. I got the attendance sheet here if you haven't signed it.